My name is Allison. At 32 years old, I had just fulfilled my decade-long dream of buying a home. For 10 years, I had saved every cent of my salary, and 6 months ago, I finally purchased a small, 2-bedroom bungalow. It was my sanctuary, a tangible symbol of my independence and hard work, complete with a little garden. Then came that unexpected Sunday when my world turned upside down. The doorbell rang, and there stood my parents, my brother Ethan, his wife Jessica, their 3 children, and 8 suitcases. My mother announced that they would be moving in with me for a while, a moment that completely shattered my peaceful existence. Before this story unfolds into a full-blown family conflict, I'll give you a little background on how I got here. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Warren, Michigan, I quickly learned about our family's unspoken rules. My role was to be the responsible older sister and set an example, while my younger brother Ethan was the golden child who could do no wrong. Our home was small but comfortable, and my parents worked hard, though they never seemed to notice the clear favoritism they showed. My father worked at a local automotive plant, and my mother was a dental receptionist part-time. They were good people, but the imbalance in how they treated us was undeniable. By the time I was 14, I had a job, first shelving books at the library, then waitressing at a diner. My parents made it clear that if I wanted to go to college, I was on my own to pay for it. Ethan, however, never had a job in high school. He spent his time playing sports and going to parties, enjoying the carefree teenage years I never had. When I graduated with honors, our celebration was small. For years later, when Ethan barely passed, my parents threw him a lavish party and even bought him a used car. The pattern was set from a young age and never truly changed. I paid my way through community college, then transferred to a state university, balancing 2 jobs and a 3.8 GPA. I lived in the cheapest apartment I could find and survived on ramen, often working overnight shifts at the hospital to make ends meet. Meanwhile, my parents paid for Ethan to attend the same university, covering his rent in a nice apartment and giving him a monthly allowance. After I graduated, I landed a modest-paying entry-level job in hospital administration, but I had a strategy. I put half of every paycheck into savings. There were no vacations, no new clothes, and no dinners out for me. My friends called me obsessive, but I was focused on a single dream, owning a home that was completely my own. For a decade, I stuck to this lifestyle. I earned 3 promotions and became a department administrator at a large Detroit hospital, but I remained frugal. I drove the same reliable Honda I had bought after college and lived with roommates until I was 30. Every bonus I earned went directly into my house fund. In the meantime, Ethan drifted between jobs, often quitting after just a few months because he disliked his boss, the hours were too long, or he felt he deserved more money. He married Jessica at 24, and they quickly had 3 children, Tyler, age 7, Emma, age 5, and little Jacob, who was only 3. Jessica worked sporadically in retail but would quit whenever childcare became too complicated. When they were in a bind financially, which was often, my parents always bailed them out. My parents paid their rent when they were short, bought groceries, and even covered preschool tuition. The bank of mom and dad was always open for Ethan's family while I continued to work independently toward my goal. 6 months ago, that goal finally became a reality. After 10 years of disciplined saving, I purchased a small but charming 2-bedroom bungalow in a quiet Detroit suburb. It wasn't large or extravagant, but it was mine. I can still remember standing alone in the empty living room the day I got the keys, crying tears of sheer pride. I had done it completely on my own. Nobody else could lay claim to this achievement. I spent my weekends painting the walls and planting flowers in the small garden. I carefully selected each piece of furniture, often finding and restoring quality pieces from estate sales. The 2nd bedroom became my home office, a sacred space where I could work and pursue my love of watercolor painting. My sanctuary had large windows, pleasant-sounding creaky hardwood floors, and a kitchen with just enough counter space for my cooking needs. It was perfectly sized for me and my belongings. At family gatherings, my homeownership was met with quick, passing comments like "That's nice, Allison," before the conversation shifted to Ethan's latest job or his kid's newest cute antic. It didn't bother me. I had given up seeking their approval years ago. My home was for my own satisfaction, not for their validation. At our last family dinner 3 weeks ago, Ethan had vaguely mentioned some issues with his landlord and their apartment's maintenance. Jessica had chimed in that the neighborhood was going downhill. I offered sympathetic noises but kept my distance. I had learned from years of experience that getting involved in their problems only led to me being taken advantage of. That Sunday morning had started so peacefully. I woke early, as I usually do, and drank my coffee on the back porch. The spring air was cool and the birds sang in the maple tree I had planted. I felt a deep sense of contentment, exactly where I was meant to be. I planned to paint and perhaps meet my friend for an early dinner. Then, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. In my robe and slippers, still holding my coffee, I opened the door. My entire family was on my porch. My parents in front, with Ethan, Jessica, and their 3 children trailing behind. At their feet were numerous suitcases, duffel bags, and plastic containers. For a brief moment, I thought I was in some kind of strange dream. My mother's voice was overly cheerful as she said they had come to help Ethan and his family move in for a while because they needed a place to stay. I was frozen in the doorway, my mind trying to make sense of what was happening. Before I could even respond, my father walked past me into the house. He gestured to the luggage and asked where to put everything. He then told Ethan to help him get the rest of the bags from the car. The rest, I thought to myself in disbelief. Next, Jessica guided her children past me, barely making eye contact. She told the kids to go explore their new home but to be careful not to break anything, as they raced past me. I finally managed to say wait, but no one heard me. My mother was already in my kitchen, opening cupboards and commenting on the need to go grocery shopping. Ethan and my father were already making trips to and from the minivan. My brother, Ethan, used my old childhood nickname and said I had a nice place, though a bit small for everyone. My heart sank as Tyler and Emma started jumping on my sofa with their shoes on. Just until they found a new place, Jessica said, finally looking at me directly. She was pulling toys out of a bag and scattering them across my living room. She said that Ethan told her I wouldn't mind, because family helps family. I then heard a crash from my office, followed by my 3-year-old nephew's cry. Jessica sighed and hurried down the hallway, saying she was coming. My father returned with another box and asked where to set up the kids' beds, mentioning that the second bedroom seemed a bit small for 3 children. I told him that was my office and I worked from there. My mother, emerging from the kitchen, said I could move all my office stuff to the dining area for now since I didn't entertain much anyway. She said it so matter-of-factly, as if it was a simple change. I felt like I was in an alternate reality. No one had asked if this was okay. No one had even given me a heads up. They had simply shown up, expecting to move into my home. Suddenly, memories from our last family dinner came back to me. Ethan had mentioned his lease was ending soon, Jessica had said how nice my neighborhood was, and my mother had pointed out how much space I had for one person. I realized they had been dropping hints, but I had completely missed them. Trying to keep my voice steady, I asked how long they planned to stay. Ethan and Jessica exchanged a look. Ethan slowly explained that they had already given up their apartment because the rent went up, so they were staying until they got back on their feet. I asked if that meant a week or a month, but my mother interjected, saying that family helping family couldn't have a timeline. They would stay as long as they needed to. A headache was starting to form. My peaceful Sunday was completely gone, replaced by the shouts and running of children. Jacob, having recovered from his fall, was now pulling books from my shelves and dropping them on the floor. Ethan added that they would, of course, need my bedroom, saying it was the only one big enough for him, Jessica, and Jacob. He explained that the kids could have the second bedroom once my office supplies were moved. In a louder voice, I asked where I was supposed to sleep. Jessica yelled from the hallway that the sofa pulled out, and it would only be temporary. Temporary. A word my family had used many times over the years for favors that always turned into permanent situations. There had been temporary loans never repaid and temporary childcare that became regular obligations. As I watched my nephew, Tyler, reach for my hand-painted ceramic bowls on a shelf, I quickly stepped in to stop him. I firmly told him not to touch them because they were fragile. My mother criticized me for being so uptight, saying he was just curious and kids need to explore. I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. This was my home, my sanctuary, the product of years of sacrifice, and it was being invaded and rearranged without my permission. I knew I needed to establish boundaries, but the right words wouldn't come. I had spent a lifetime putting my family's needs before my own, and it felt impossible to break that pattern now. Jessica emerged from the hallway, a thoughtful look on her face. She said my closet was full and that she would need to clear out at least half of it for their things. She also suggested moving my dresser to the garage since they had brought their own that would match their bed frame. That's when I saw her holding my grandmother's antique jewelry box, the only thing I had inherited from her. Jessica was opening and closing it, looking at the contents as if they were for sale. My voice was sharper as I told her to put it back because it belonged to my grandmother. She seemed surprised by my tone but went back into the room with it. When she returned, she was carrying a stack of my clothes. She said she was getting started on making some room and dropped my blouses and dresses onto a chair. She then said that I wouldn't need all those work clothes anyway since I would be sleeping in the living room. I stood there in the middle of my own living room, watching my carefully curated home being dismantled. It was at that exact moment that I realized I had to make a choice. I could either revert to my old ways of giving in and putting my family's demands first, or I could finally stand up for myself. Seeing Jessica carelessly sort through my clothes, deciding what to move and what I could keep, something inside me clicked. A lifetime of giving in had led to this moment of complete clarity. This was my home. I had worked and sacrificed for it. I wasn't going to give it up. Stop, I said loudly, and everyone in the house stopped what they were doing. My mother looked up from rearranging my kitchen cabinets, my father froze in the doorway with another box, and Ethan and Jessica exchanged confused glances. Even the children paused for a moment. I struggled to keep my voice steady. I think there has been a misunderstanding. I was not consulted about any of this. Nobody asked if you could move in here. My mother laughed, a short, dismissive sound. She asked why they would need to ask since they were family and family helps family. I calmly replied that that phrase did not give them the right to take over my home without my permission. My father put down the box he was holding and looked at me with a frown. He said that my brother and his family needed help since they had lost their apartment. I corrected him, saying they hadn't lost it. Ethan had just said they chose not to renew their lease because the rent went up. Ethan got defensive, and I asked if the rent really went up, or if they had fallen behind on payments again. I was suspicious. I had heard similar stories for years. The look that passed between Ethan and Jessica confirmed my suspicions. Ethan reluctantly admitted they were a little behind, but the landlord had been unreasonable, threatening to evict them after they had only missed 2 months' rent. 2 months? I repeated. I pointed out that both he and Jessica had jobs and asked where their money was going. Jessica visibly bristled, saying they had 3 children to support and asked if I had any idea how expensive that was. I glanced at the designer purse she had on my coffee table, the latest iPhone in her pocket, and the brand new sneakers her kids were wearing. Children were certainly expensive, but I had seen their social media posts about weekend trips, the new gaming system they had bought, and the expensive restaurants they often ate at. I pointed out that they both worked full-time and my parents helped them constantly, yet they still never had enough money for rent. My mother snapped at me not to judge their situation, saying that not everyone could be as perfect as I was. Perfect, I thought. That was a joke. I had never been the perfect one, that role had always belonged to Ethan. I told her it wasn't about being perfect, it was about respecting boundaries. I calmly stated that they couldn't just show up at my door and expect to move in because this was my home. My father repeated the phrase "your home" as if the concept was foreign to him. He said we were talking about family, blood, and asked if I would really turn away my own brother and his children. The guilt trip was all too familiar. I carefully said that I would have been happy to discuss ways to help, but moving in without asking, taking over my bedroom, and rearranging my things was not acceptable. Ethan stepped forward, looking confused and angry, and asked what they were supposed to do since they had nowhere to go and had already given up their apartment. I pointed out that that was their choice, a choice they made without consulting me. Jessica's voice rose, saying they didn't think they needed to consult me because my brother had told her I would help. She said I always acted so high and mighty with my responsible job and saving habits, and they thought I would want to share what I had. Share what I had, I thought to myself. As if my home, the result of a decade of sacrifice and discipline, was a communal asset. I told them I had shared plenty over the years, as memories of loans I had given Ethan that were never repaid and times I had watched his kids for free came back to me. My mother insisted that that's what family does, they share and help each other. I quietly asked when Ethan had ever helped me, and the question hung in the air. Nobody had an answer. I watched as Tyler resumed jumping on my sofa, leaving dirty marks on the cushions. Emma had found my watercolor paints and was opening tubes on the carpet. Jacob was pulling more books from the shelves. I pointed out that their children were destroying my things and that none of them were doing anything to stop them. Jessica dismissively said they were just being kids and couldn't be expected to understand my fancy rules. My fancy rules? Like not jumping on furniture with shoes on? The realization hit me then with absolute clarity, this was never going to change. The dynamic had been set decades ago, and nothing I said or did would change it unless I changed it right now. My voice was stronger as I told everyone to stop what they were doing and that this wasn't going to work and they couldn't stay here. My mother's mouth fell open in shock, and she asked what I meant, saying of course they could stay because they were family. I told her that being family didn't give her the right to take advantage of me and that that was exactly what this was. My father's face reddened as he asked how I dared to say that after everything they had done for me. I almost laughed at that. What had they done for me? They hadn't helped me with college, they hadn't helped me buy this house, and they had never supported my goals or celebrated my achievements. So what exactly did I owe them? My words hit them like a blow. No one in my family was used to me speaking so directly. I had always been the peacekeeper, the one who went along with everything. Ethan crossed his arms and said he thought I was being incredibly selfish. I had an entire house to myself, while they had 5 people to house. I told him that wasn't my responsibility and that I bought the house for myself with my own money, not as a free hotel for them to stay in because they mismanaged their finances. Jessica scoffed and said of course I would throw money in their faces because I didn't have children to support. I interrupted her and told her that was a choice, just as their financial decisions were choices, and choices have consequences. I could feel the tension rising. Ethan's face was getting red with anger. My mother's go-to tactic, tears, was beginning to surface. My father looked ready to lecture me on family loyalty. But this time, I didn't care. All the feelings I had suppressed for years were finally emerging. I was tired of being taken for granted, having my boundaries ignored, and being expected to sacrifice while Ethan was spoiled. I told everyone firmly that I wanted them to pack their belongings and leave immediately. My mother's face crumpled like tissue paper. She gasped, telling me I couldn't be serious, asking if I was truly throwing my own family out and where they were supposed to go. I responded that their problem was not my concern. The words felt foreign coming from my mouth. I had never been so direct or firm with them before. I told them they should have considered that before they gave up their apartment and showed up at my house unannounced. My father's face turned an alarming shade of red as he thundered that he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He accused me of turning away my own flesh and blood when they needed help. I simply replied that I was. Jessica was now gathering her children close, as if to shield them from me, the heartless monster. I heard her hiss at Ethan that she had told him this was a bad idea and that I had always been cold and selfish. I wondered if I was considered cold and selfish because I refused to give up my home, privacy, and bedroom to people who had shown no respect for my boundaries. Ethan's voice rose as he demanded to know where they would sleep that night, asking if I had even considered where his children would sleep. I repeated that they should have thought about that before giving up their apartment, and that their lack of planning didn't create an emergency for me. My mother's theatrical sobs, which had been so effective at manipulating me in the past, began in earnest. She wailed about her grandchildren being on the street. I told her, unmoved, that they wouldn't be on the street and that she and my father had a 3-bedroom house where they could stay. My father snapped that their house was being renovated, the upstairs was torn apart, and they were staying in a hotel. This was news to me. I asked when the renovation started. My mother replied through her sobs that it began last week, and they thought it was the perfect time since Ethan and his family would be staying with me. Everything suddenly made sense. This wasn't a spontaneous decision at all, it was a planned and coordinated effort. My parents had started their home renovations knowing they would foist Ethan's family on me. They had all discussed and arranged this without ever once considering my opinion. The betrayal was deeper than I had expected, and their silence was all the confirmation I needed. I told them that's not how things work. They don't get to make decisions about my home, my space, or my life without my input. My mother's face was contorted with anger and disbelief as she suddenly screamed, demanding to know where they would sleep if I threw them out. The room fell silent after her outburst. The children had stopped and were watching the adult drama unfold with wide eyes. I took a deep breath, knowing this was my chance to break the pattern. I said, quietly but firmly, that they wouldn't be sleeping here tonight or any night. My father stepped toward me, his finger pointing in accusation. He said that if I did this, if I turned my back on family, I was no longer his daughter. This was the threat that had terrified me for years. It had kept me in line and kept me giving until I had nothing left. But standing in my own home, looking at their entitlement, I had a profound realization. The threat no longer held any power over me. What was I really losing if I was cut off from this dynamic? The constant expectation to give without receiving? The dismissal of my achievements? The complete disregard for my boundaries? I calmly told him that that was his choice to make, but this was my home, and I got to choose who stayed in it. My mother's voice trembled as she reminded me of everything they had done for me and asked if this was how I was repaying them. I asked again, genuinely curious, what they believed they had done for me as an adult. My father bellowed that they had raised me. I pointed out that raising me was their obligation as parents and didn't give them the right to dictate my life now that I was an adult. Ethan stepped forward, his face full of contempt. He said I had always thought I was better than them with my fancy job, perfect credit score, and my little house that I loved to remind everyone I bought myself. I corrected him, saying I didn't think I was better, I just made different choices and had every right to be proud of my accomplishments. Jessica interjected, asking if my accomplishments were more important than my family, and more important than giving a place to stay to my nieces and nephew. I clarified that my boundaries were important and that they had all shown complete disregard for them today. I looked at the chaos they had created, from the scattered books and dirty shoe prints to my clothes piled on a chair. No one had even attempted to control the children or respect my space. Ethan said that my mother had promised they could stay as long as they needed and had told him I had plenty of room and would be happy to help. I turned to my mother, who looked slightly ashamed, and told her she had no right to make that promise. She replied defensively that she hadn't thought I would be so heartless. I told her that setting boundaries wasn't heartless, but showing up unannounced and expecting to take over someone's home was. Jessica dropped another bombshell. they had already registered the kids for school in the district and Tyler would start on Monday. I stared at her in disbelief. I then told them that they had enrolled the children in school before even asking if they could stay with me. Ethan exploded, saying they hadn't thought I would say no and asked what kind of person would say no to family. I replied that it was the kind of person who had been taken advantage of her entire life and was finally saying enough. The situation was quickly getting out of control. My sanctuary had become a battleground. I moved toward the front door, opened it wide, and told them all that I needed them to leave now and take their things with them. My father's voice was dangerously low as he said I couldn't be serious. I replied that I was completely serious, that this was my home, and I was asking them to leave. Ethan challenged me, asking what would happen if they refused. I responded by taking my phone from my pocket and telling him I would call the police to have them removed for trespassing. A collective gasp filled the room. This was the ultimate betrayal in their eyes, involving outsiders in family business. My mother whispered that I wouldn't dare, but I unlocked my phone and started dialing, thinking to myself, try me. I will never forget the look on their faces when they realized I was serious. It was a mix of shock, betrayal, and disbelief, and a dawning understanding that the old rules no longer applied. They grudgingly began gathering their things, muttering about my cruelty and selfishness. I stood by the door, phone in hand, ready if needed. It didn't come to that. Within 20 minutes, they had loaded their belongings back into their vehicles. My father told me this wasn't over and that I would regret my decision. I said nothing, simply held the door as they filed out. When the last suitcase was gone and the door was closed, I leaned against it, exhausted. My hands were shaking, and my heart was racing, but underneath it all, I felt an unexpected sense of relief and pride. I had finally stood up for myself. As I started cleaning up the mess they had left, I found myself thinking about the patterns that had brought us to this point. The family dynamic had been established so early that I couldn't remember a time when Ethan wasn't the favored child, and I wasn't the one expected to make sacrifices. I remembered a time when Ethan broke my science fair project. Instead of punishing him, my parents had told me to forgive him and said he didn't mean to do it and that I needed to set an example for my younger brother. I remembered saving up for a second-hand bike when I was 16. Ethan had borrowed it without asking and left it unlocked, and it was stolen. My parents had told me he was just forgetful and that I should use my savings to buy a new one, adding that I should have put it somewhere safer. This pattern continued into our adult years. When I graduated college, the celebration was small. When Ethan graduated 2 years later, my parents threw a lavish party and asked me to help pay for it, saying his achievement was important and they were a little short on money. Even my career accomplishments were minimized. When I got my first promotion, my mother's response was a simple acknowledgement before she changed the subject to Ethan thinking of starting his own business. That business never happened, but my promotion was forgotten. When I bought my house, my parents visited once, made polite comments, and then spent the rest of the visit talking about Ethan's need for a bigger place. The hints had started almost immediately about my spare bedroom seeming wasteful for just one person. I had spent years in therapy, and my therapist, Dr. Barnes, had helped me see the pattern of emotional neglect and the unfair expectations placed on me. She taught me that my worth wasn't tied to what I could give, and that boundaries were healthy, not selfish. But I knew that understanding a dynamic intellectually was different from breaking it emotionally. Today was the first time I had truly stood my ground against their manipulation. I thought about all the times Ethan had come to my apartment in college needing money for books or rent. I had given him my grocery money and eaten ramen for weeks, and he had never paid me back or properly thanked me. I remembered countless family gatherings where I was expected to cook and clean while Ethan and my father watched TV. I also remembered the many times I had changed my schedule to babysit on short notice because Jessica had more important things to do. Last Christmas, I had spent weeks finding thoughtful gifts for everyone, but Ethan and Jessica gave me a generic bath set they had clearly bought at the last minute. My parents seemed embarrassed but didn't say anything. I remembered when I was hospitalized with pneumonia 3 years ago. I had to drive myself to the emergency room, and when I called my parents from the hospital, they told me they couldn't visit because they were helping Ethan and Jessica move. No one in my family visited me during my 5-day hospital stay. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this confrontation was inevitable. The pattern of me giving and them taking was unsustainable. Something had to break, and it turned out to be my patience. My phone started ringing with calls from my mother, father, and Ethan. I silenced each one. Then the text messages started, ranging from pleading to threatening. My mother texted about how I could do this to my family. My father texted that I would regret it. Ethan texted that he hoped I enjoyed my empty house while his kids slept in a hotel. I put my phone on silent and continued cleaning. With each book I put back, my sanctuary felt more normal. It was my space, with my rules, and my life. That evening, sitting on my quiet porch, I had a profound realization. The rope that had been pulling me back into unhealthy patterns hadn't been cut by them, I had released it myself. I had finally let go of the need to please people who would never be satisfied. The calls and texts continued into the next day. I read them but didn't respond. My position was clear, and there was nothing more to say. On Monday morning, my phone rang with an unrecognized number. I answered it to hear a voice I vaguely recognized as my Aunt Susan. She told me she had just spoken with my mother and asked how I could turn away my brother and his children, saying that wasn't how I was raised. And so the smear campaign began. Family members who had never cared about my life started calling to express their disappointment. I was the villain, the heartless sister, the selfish daughter who had failed her parents. My family was spreading a carefully crafted narrative to make me look bad. I didn't try to defend myself, knowing my side of the story would be ignored. The family's narrative had no room for Ethan's irresponsibility or my parents' enabling. I was the bad guy. I always had been in their version of events. For the first time in my life, I was okay with that. The week following what I now think of as the invasion attempt was one of the most emotionally challenging of my life. The barrage of calls, texts, and social media messages continued unabated. My parents took turns between guilt-tripping and threatening. Ethan vacillated between angry accusations and wounded victimhood. Jessica posted vague but pointed comments on social media about toxic family members and selfish people who put material possessions above children's welfare. I maintained my silence, which only seemed to infuriate them more. They were used to me engaging, explaining, eventually apologizing even when I had done nothing wrong. My refusal to participate in the drama was perhaps the most radical act of all. On Wednesday evening, 3 days after the confrontation, there was a knock at my door. Looking through the peephole, I saw my father standing on the porch alone. His posture was rigid, his face set in stern lines. I considered not answering, but decided it was better to face him directly than prolong the situation. I opened the door, but did not invite him in. "Allison," he began, his voice deliberately controlled. "I have come to talk some sense into you. This has gone on long enough." "There is nothing to discuss," I said calmly. "My decision is final." "Your mother is beside herself," he continued, as if I had not spoken. "She can hardly eat or sleep. Is that what you wanted? To make your mother ill with worry?" The guilt tactic again. It had worked so effectively in the past. "Mom's emotional state is not my responsibility," I replied. "Neither is Ethan's housing situation." My father's face darkened with anger. "How can you be so cold? These are not strangers we are talking about. This is your family. Being family does not give you the right to disrespect my boundaries," I said. "I have made my position clear." "And I have made mine clear," he snapped. "If you persist in this selfishness, do not consider yourself part of this family anymore." The threat I had feared for so long. Except now, standing in the doorway of my own home, I realized it had lost its power over me. If being part of the family means giving up my home, my privacy, and my self-respect, then perhaps that is for the best, I said quietly. He stared at me for a long moment, seemingly unable to process that his ultimate threat had failed. Without another word, he turned and walked back to his car. I closed the door and leaned against it. Tears finally coming. Not tears of regret or fear, but tears of release. I was grieving the family I had always wished for but never had. The supportive parents who celebrated my achievements, the brother who respected my boundaries, the family unit that functioned with mutual love and respect rather than obligation and guilt. The next morning, I called Dr. Barnes and scheduled an emergency therapy session. I needed help processing what had happened and preparing for what might come next. "You did something incredibly difficult," she told me during our session. "You broke a lifelong pattern and stood up for yourself against intense pressure. That takes extraordinary courage." "Then why do I feel so terrible?" I asked. "Because you have been conditioned to believe that your needs do not matter," she explained. "Because you have been taught that setting boundaries is selfish because your family has trained you to feel responsible for their emotions and choices." We spent the hour discussing healthy boundaries and the grief that comes with recognizing unhealthy family dynamics. She reminded me that I had done nothing wrong by protecting my space and my peace. "Your home represents more than just physical shelter," she pointed out. "It represents your independence, your achievement, your right to determine your own life. Defending it was defending yourself." The weekend approached and with it came the monthly family dinner that had been a tradition for years. Normally held at my parents' house, it had been moved to my aunt and uncle's home due to my parents' ongoing renovations. I received no invitation, which was both painful and a relief. Sunday evening, as I sat alone in my peaceful living room, my phone lit up with a group text from my cousin. It was a photo from the family dinner, everyone gathered around the table, smiling for the camera. The caption read, "Family is everything." The exclusion was deliberate, designed to hurt me, to show me what I was missing by not complying with the family's demands. I felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of freedom. For the first time in my adult life, I was spending a Sunday evening exactly as I wanted to, without the tension and walking on eggshells that family gatherings always entailed. 2 weeks after the confrontation, the intensity of the communication campaign began to wane. The daily calls became every other day, then twice a week. The text messages grew less frequent. Family members who had been enlisted to pressure me seemed to lose interest in the crusade. I learned through a mutual friend that Ethan and his family had moved in with my parents at their hotel suite, creating a cramped but workable living arrangement until the house renovations were completed. Exactly the solution that should have been implemented from the beginning rather than trying to displace me from my home. 3 weeks in, I received an unexpected text from Jessica. "The kids miss their aunt. Tyler keeps asking when we can visit you again." It was a peace offering of sorts, though, one that still carried an undercurrent of manipulation. The implication was clear: if I wanted a relationship with my nieces and nephew, I would need to make amends. I replied carefully. "I miss them, too. When things have settled down, perhaps we can arrange a day at the park, a neutral public meeting place, a time-limited engagement, clear boundaries." She did not respond. A month after the confrontation, I received a text from Ethan. It was the closest thing to an apology I had ever received from him. "I have been thinking about what happened," he wrote. "I still think you could have handled it better, but I understand why you were upset. We should have asked first." Not a real apology, no acknowledgement of the entitlement or boundary violations, but a small step toward awareness. I did not reply immediately. I needed time to consider whether and how to engage. After consulting with Dr. Barnes, I sent a brief response. "Thank you for acknowledging that. In the future, I hope we can communicate more directly about expectations and boundaries." He sent back a thumbs-up emoji. Not exactly a heartfelt reconciliation, but a start. 6 weeks after the confrontation, my mother called. I had been expecting this call, knowing that of all family members, she would find it hardest to maintain the silence. "Allison," she said when I answered, her voice carefully neutral, "how are you?" "I am fine, Mom," I replied. "How are you?" "The renovations are finally finished," she said, ignoring my question. "The house looks beautiful. You should come see it sometime." An olive branch extended awkwardly but genuinely. "I would like that," I said. "Maybe next weekend." "That would be nice," she replied. And I could hear the relief in her voice. "Just you, though. Ethan and his family are still staying with us while they look for a new place." Progress. She was respecting at least one boundary, acknowledging that I might not be ready to see my brother yet. "Just me," I agreed. As I hung up, I realized that standing firm had done what years of accommodating never could. It had begun to shift the dynamic. Not completely, not permanently perhaps, but enough to create space for a different kind of relationship. My home remained my sanctuary. My boundaries had held firm, and somewhere along the way, I had discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. 6 months have passed since that Sunday morning when my family showed up on my doorstep with suitcases and expectations. 6 months of rebuilding relationships on new terms, of maintaining boundaries, of learning to trust my own judgment above the protests and demands of others. My home remains my sanctuary. I have added new plants to the garden, repainted the kitchen a sunny yellow that makes me smile each morning, and converted part of my office into a proper art studio where I can pursue my watercolor painting with dedication. Every corner of this space reflects my choices, my taste, my life. The peace I feel when I walk through the front door each evening is worth every difficult conversation, every uncomfortable confrontation. The relationship with my family has evolved in ways I never expected. There have been setbacks and difficult moments, but also surprising progress. The journey has not been linear, but it has been meaningful. My mother and I have established a new kind of relationship. We meet for lunch every other week, just the two of us. Our conversations remain somewhat superficial, but there is a growing respect between us. She no longer asks me to babysit at the last minute or makes comments about my extra space. When she recently complimented my latest promotion at work without immediately changing the subject to Ethan, I nearly fell out of my chair in shock. My father has been slower to adjust to the new normal. He remains somewhat distant, uncomfortable with the shift in power dynamics. But even he has begun to show small signs of change. Last month, when I mentioned a problem I was having with my car, he offered advice without taking over or criticizing my decisions. It was a small thing, but significant. Ethan and I have maintained a cautious distance. We see each other at family gatherings, but rarely communicate directly. He sent me a birthday card last month, store-bought, but with a handwritten note that said simply, "Hope your day is special. Thanks for being there for the kids." Not an explicit acknowledgement of past wrongs, but a far cry from the entitled demands of 6 months ago. Jessica remains cool toward me, but she has respected my boundaries regarding the children. We have established a monthly outing where I take my nieces and nephew to a museum, park, or child-friendly event. These visits are scheduled in advance, time-limited, and take place outside my home. The children have adjusted to this new arrangement and seem to enjoy our special Aunt Allison days. Perhaps the most profound changes have been internal. Through continued therapy and reflection, I have come to understand that establishing boundaries is not just about saying no to others. It is about saying yes to myself. Yes to my needs, my dreams, my right to determine the course of my own life. I have learned that helping others is meaningful only when it comes from genuine choice, not obligation or fear. The difference between generosity and enabling is consent. When I choose to help my family now, it is a deliberate decision made with clear expectations and limits, not a reflexive response to guilt or manipulation. The most unexpected outcome has been watching Ethan begin to take responsibility for his own life. Without the safety net of my home as a fallback option, he and Jessica have made some significant changes. They both work full-time now and have moved into an apartment they can actually afford. According to my mother, they have started a budgeting system and are taking financial literacy classes at the community center. Would these changes have happened if I had given in that Sunday morning? If I had allowed them to take over my home, my bedroom, my life? I doubt it. By refusing to enable their irresponsible behavior, I inadvertently gave them the gift of consequence, the opportunity to grow and change. There is a profound difference between helping and enabling. Helping empowers the other person to solve their own problems. Enabling shields them from the consequences of their actions, preventing growth and perpetuating dependency. For years, my entire family had been caught in a cycle of enabling with Ethan, never having to face the results of his choices. Last week, I received a text from Ethan that nearly brought me to tears. "The kids and I just signed a lease on our own apartment," he wrote. 2 bedrooms, nothing fancy, but it is ours. Jessica and I are working opposite shifts for now, so someone is always with the kids. It is hard, but it feels good to stand on our own feet. I stared at those words for a long time. It feels good to stand on our own feet. Perhaps that was the gift I had given my brother by refusing to be his safety net, the opportunity to discover his own strength, his own capability. My mother called yesterday to invite me to a family dinner this weekend. "Ethan and the kids will be there," she said. "They are celebrating the new apartment. I thought you might want to be part of it." The invitation was offered without pressure or guilt, a simple acknowledgement that I am still part of the family despite having established firm boundaries. Progress indeed. As I sit here in my peaceful garden on another Sunday morning, coffee in hand, birds singing in the maple tree that has grown noticeably in the past 6 months, I reflect on how far we have all come. The journey has been painful at times, but necessary. My home remains my sanctuary, my achievement, my independence. But it represents something even more important now. It represents my worth, my right to determine my own boundaries, my courage to stand firm in the face of pressure and guilt. Every room, every personal touch, every moment of peace within these walls reminds me of the stand I took and the growth that followed. If you have ever faced a similar situation, struggling to establish boundaries with family or friends who feel entitled to more than you can give, I hope my story offers some comfort and courage. Standing your ground is difficult, especially with those you love. But sometimes the most loving thing you can do for others and for yourself is to say no when no is the right answer. Have you ever had to establish difficult boundaries with loved ones? How did you handle it and what was the outcome? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might give someone else the courage they need to protect their own boundaries. And if this story resonated with you, please hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, you have the right to protect your peace, your space, and your sanity, no matter what anyone else might say. Thank you for listening, and may you find the strength to stand firm in your own life.